Hi, my name's Roger Harrop. I'm known as the CEO expert. I used to run businesses all over the world. More recently, I've been a professional speaker. But I'm all about business. I'm an author too, written a couple of books. And if you're running a business, whether it's a small startup business, anything all the way through to being on the C-suite of a big business, this is for you. Because it's all about getting in that helicopter and keeping big business simple and getting massive success as a result. It's all going to be on the Online Prosperity Show. Tune in.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Online Prosperity Show, the number one place where coaches, consultants, and entrepreneurs discover the mindset, strategies, and the real-life lessons that turn ideas into impact. I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga, and today's episode is for anyone who's ever looked at their business and thought, there's got to be a better way to lead, to grow, and still stay sane while you're doing it, okay? So, obviously, today we're joined by somebody who's not only just talked about leadership or transformation, but somebody who's actually lived it. I'd like to welcome Roger. Now, Roger, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Nice to be with you, Prosper.
Absolutely. Well, the pleasure is all mine. I don't know where I fit into your schedule because you've spoken to over 30,000 CEOs across 50 different countries, and you still find time to speak to old me.
Priorities. You're the first.
Fantastic. So for those that are watching, Roger has turned decades of boardroom experience, near burnout moments, and globe-trotting adventures into practical wisdom that actually help business leaders to thrive, not just survive. And speaking of survival, well, Roger has actually gone ahead and hired a private investigator.
You're not telling my stories, are you, Prosper?
Not yet. So I'm asking them to tune in so they'll find out why you had to find a private investigator. So if you've ever wondered what it takes to go from CEO stress to CEO success, this conversation might actually be that turning point for you. Now, Roger, obviously you've had a lot of global impact. You've had, a lot of chats with so many different people, but I've got to ask, what kind of haircut makes a man hire a private eye to find a stylist?
Just nothing special. She was just a good stylist.
I know. When I saw that, Roger, I was just like, here comes a man with a lot of tails. But anyway, we just started off with the private investigator stuff. Tell us a little bit about your journey. I mean, you've spoken to 30,000 people. Do you still have a voice?
Yeah. I still have a voice. And so I guess a bit about my background. I'm an engineer and a marketer by profession. Was a project manager at a very young age, building a power station in Kenya. So I lived in Mombasa. My eldest daughter spoke Swahili before she spoke English, and all that good stuff, Got into running businesses then, mainly in engineering or electronics businesses, ended up running a PLC, a company quoted on the London Stock Exchange. I'd always had companies around the world. And we grew that business. I mean, we grew, for example, the exports of that business from 12% to 85% over the period I was running it. It was great stuff. Won lots of prizes, quoted in Forbes magazine in the USA, one of the best overseas companies. And then all the nasty stuff happened where we got taken over. I won't go into all the details, but we got taken over, and I got a bit disillusioned, if I'm really honest. I did then get another job running an even bigger business, but I gave it all up. one day, 20 odd years ago now, decided I wanted to work with smaller businesses, got myself accredited as a small business advisor. And then somehow I found myself speaking, and people wanted to pay me to speak. So I thought I'd better do that properly. So I joined the Professional Speaking Association to learn the tools of the trade, ended up as the president. And as you say, I've written a couple of books, and I just love working with people running business or involved in running business, from the smallest startup all the way through to the biggest multinational corporate. All of them are my audience, and I just love it. You know, the real kick I get is, I mean, just a little while ago, I got an email from a guy. He said, "You won't remember me." He said, "I was in a workshop of yours, a masterclass of yours last year. We've just had a record year in our business. That's down to you. Thank you very much." And you go, wow, you know, that's just tremendous. And I love every day. I love people and I love business.
Absolutely. And you haven't sent a private eye to find out who that guy was?
Pray not. Is this private eye thing going to go on through the whole hour? My kids just think I'm a lunatic for hiring a private eye, but there you go.
Now, Roger, obviously you're talking about, a high stakes and a high profile, career. You're overseas, you're, in a country that's not home. And like you said, your daughter actually learned to speak Swahili before, they could speak English. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that people read about in a business school case study. But what was it like really being behind that title and having that worldly experience at that time?
Oh, just fantastic. I mean, I guess you've got to have the attitude of mind, which is, this is a massive opportunity. We were there for 3 years. I was only about 28 at the time, I think, something like that. And you learn what you take for granted in developed countries, if you like. In our house, we had water 3 days a week. We didn't have water every day of the week, all kinds of things. You had to look out for yourself. Ever since, I've always said to people, if you get an opportunity to work overseas, anywhere overseas, you've got to take it. It just broadens the mind. Much more is on your shoulders. You've got to work things out for yourself. I just find it just the best thing to do, to be honest. And it's the same now with my speaking. I just love working in developing countries. If we have time later, I've got a great story to tell you in Ethiopia, where I've worked a couple of times I had 40 business leaders there in Ethiopia, and it was just phenomenal. So lots to take from that. But I think you've got to have the attitude of mind that you want to go. I mean, I always remember a little story when I was, I just opened, we were just going to start manufacturing in Japan in a business I had. And there was a guy I wanted to go over there just for a year to set it all up. And, he was going to have his salary increased, and he was going to have this opportunity. And he sat in front of me and he went through a list of reasons why he wouldn't go, including the last question was, what would I do with my cat? Well, frankly, if you've got that sort of attitude, you're not going to get anywhere. Just embrace things. Don't think about the downsides. Think about the upsides, because the opportunities, the way your life is enhanced by working and traveling around the world, I just think is phenomenal.
Absolutely. You know what I like about that? Because I'm coming from the opposite direction, where I grew up in the third world. I'm from Zimbabwe, right? And, having to come over into the first world where everything is works, and you actually get, frustrated that everything's actually working too much. So I think perspective is very important, especially when you're in a leadership position, because then you can now have an understanding of why somebody's doing things the way that they are doing. Sure. So you've had this experience, and you've had it in different, places in the world, which actually opens you up to quite a lot. But the final.
But you know what? Sorry, Prosper. Go on.
Yeah, the final year that you were CEO, that's when you said there was that takeover and everything else.
Sure.
What was actually maybe happening that made you say, I don't want to do this anymore?
Well, I guess, I wouldn't want to go into too much detail, but at one point I had 21 people, sharks, circling our business, wanting to buy it. And as the CEO of a PLC, it is your responsibility to try and sell your business to every single one of them, even though you don't want to sell it to any of them. So for the last 18 months I was in the business, I wasn't running the business really. In effect, all you were doing was, and all your competitors come along, they all get shown all this. It's horrendous. And as far as the financial institutions are concerned, for them it's black or white. Either you are, as they call it, in play, or you're not in play. And if you're in play, you're going to be sold. It's not a question of if, it's when. And you really suddenly are no longer in control or no longer can influence the business that you've been running for 7 years. And that's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, I quite like that. And obviously, it's at that time, not a lot of people get to experience an exit, and the sort of an exit that has been formulated in that sort of way. And so most businesses don't quite create with the end in sight. And I think with that sort of experience that you had at that particular moment, that would have positioned you to be, the advisor you are now to help people obviously work with the end in sight. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all these things it's all part of the learning process, isn't it? But absolutely. Certainly in terms of people having exits from their business, there are all kinds of options. The important thing is to look at them all. And, when I've worked with people who are thinking of selling their business, I always insist on spending a day with them one-on-one in a room with a flip chart. And I'm going through all the pros and all the cons, all the upsides and all the downsides to all the different, so that they're aware of all that, because, there's lots of elephant traps, to be honest, in no matter which direction you're going in. Equally, there's lots of brilliant upsides, but it's all about going into things with your eyes open if you can, I guess, Prosper.
Absolutely. And talking about going into things with your eyes open, you transitioned from CEO to self-employment, and that's a massive shift for a lot of people. First of all, how did you handle that? Oh no, there's no more paycheck coming in every single month and things of that nature. And were you still in Africa by that time, or did you?
No. This was much later. I was only in Africa for 3 years, right. Back in the 70s. So no, this was much later. Where are we? We're talking 2000, the year 2000, something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, I was in a better position than a lot of people might have been. I'd been in a senior position. I'd done pretty well. I got a payoff, and I had a couple of non-exec director jobs as well. So it wasn't like it was nothing. But nevertheless, you're absolutely right. I these days I mentor quite a lot of speakers, people who are wanting to become speakers or on the journey, and it's a big decision to actually let go of that, as you say, paycheck, and rely on yourself for that income and to pay the mortgage and all the other stuff. It's a big decision to take. But on the other hand, if I'm honest, if you don't do that, you're never really committed. And if you're not really committed, you probably aren't going to be successful. Let's put it as black and white as that.
Absolutely. See, you can't climb the ladder of success with your hands full. You'd have all these things happening, and yeah, absolutely. So yeah, speaking of which, you've spoken to over 30,000 CEOs. What's like the most common leadership mistake that you see that is being repeated, at the top?
Very good question. I'm surprised generally how few business leaders have actually thought about what you mentioned earlier, which is, what's the purpose? Why are you doing it? Why is the business there? Why does it exist? And what does success look like? And that really is the only place to start. I've got, a story I tell where I got it wrong, where, I was a hired hand, a CEO of a business, and I just assumed that everyone running a business wanted the maximum sustained profitable growth. But this particular business, I found out down the hard way, that isn't what they wanted at all. They wanted something quite different. So, probably the biggest message that I have to repeat to business leaders at all kinds of levels, if you are running a business or involved in running a business for somebody else or a charity, or a not-for-profit, you have got to know what the purpose is. And the only people who can tell you what the purpose is are the owners, the shareholders, the trustees. They have got to tell you what success looks like. Otherwise, you're going to assume, and there's a strong chance you're going to get it wrong.
You see, every other leader that is churned out of some MBA school or some, finishing school has profits and bottom line and everything else drilled in them. But you're saying there's another way, and you're actually challenging conventional wisdom by actually keeping things simple in this way, right?
Well, maybe. And, it's funny. People often ask, why is it when a business goes through a management buyout that often a relatively ordinary group of managers suddenly seem to perform? But for me, it's really obvious. The private equity house, the venture capitalists, from the moment they invest, have one focus and one focus only, and that's their exit. 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, minimum of 35% per annum compound growth. And they get the entire board to have that laser beam focus. And what I would say to everyone is, if you can have a laser beam focus like that about your purpose, you stand a very good chance of getting there, because suddenly every strategic decision you take in your business, you put across that filter. Is it a step along the way to that purpose? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, you don't do it. I mean, family businesses, you come across maybe second or third generation family businesses where they're saying, I mustn't take any risks with this business because I've been given the crown jewels. I really mustn't take any risks. But what they're actually doing is allowing that business to go decline, because, no business ever stands still. It either grows or it contracts, and it only grows if you make it grow. And therefore, the last thing you should ever do is to say, I'm going to keep this how it's always been. All those other deadly words, in my view, mine's a lifestyle business. Well, if you say that to me, that sounds to me like you've metaphorically put your feet up. And if you put your feet up, your business will go downhill. It's a fact of life,
I like that. It's always moving there. It's either going up or it's going down. And so many people are just, because there's one thing that happens in business, fish don't see the water that they swim in. They're just looking at what they want.
Absolutely. And that's why my first book is called Staying in the Helicopter. It is if you can get up there and look down at your business and have the discipline of doing that regularly, not all the time, but regularly, it is amazing what you can see. Mountains become molehills. That's the way it works. And suddenly you can see over the horizon and you can make big decisions. It's so important to get that perspective on your business if you can.
You see, a lot of people have this, it's always been like this, and don't
if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah.
But you've actually built a career transforming CEOs, and helping them with their leadership. What does transformation actually look like when somebody has worked with you?
Oh gosh, what does it look like? That's a big one to answer, but I always see it as a process. And let's start in this helicopter at 30,000 feet. If you can nail the purpose, as I've already talked about, you're well along the way. You are crystal clear, and the people who work with you are crystal clear what this business is there for. Why does it exist? Next, after that, 25,000 feet, you need to be clear about your vision and your values. And that's something you should be sharing with all your stakeholders. And I really mean all your stakeholders. Values, increasingly these days, talent will not work for you unless they share your values. Increasingly, customers won't buy from you unless they share your values. So you've got to be very clear about those values, and they cannot be just motherhood and apple pie stuff. They've got to be genuine. Because everything is clear to anyone these days out in the internet, whether you're looking at Glassdoors or any of these other websites. People know what you're like as an employer. All that stuff is out there. So, you've nailed a purpose, you've nailed your vision and values, which is what you can share with everyone, which they're signing up to. And then after that, you can be looking at hopefully a 3-year development plan where you're taking risks. It is the job of business leaders to take risks. That's why they're paid all that money. Their job is to take risks, because if they don't take risks, nobody else will in that business. And the only way to move a business forward is to take some risks. Yes, they're considered risks, but they are nevertheless risks. And you've got to be aware of what the downside might be and so on. But you've always got to be moving that business forward. It's the exact opposite of saying, I'm going to keep the status quo that I inherited from my family, my parents, or whoever was running the business previously. I mean, I'm fascinated by business. I've been watching, Rolls-Royce aero engines, which is, as you know, I think there's only 3 or 4 aero engine makers in the world. And they've been close to bankruptcy twice. They've been working fairly successfully. And then this new CEO came in, and I can't pronounce his name. He's of Turkish extraction. Tufan, I think his first name is. He's the current CEO. He has totally transformed the business. This is a massive, massive corporation, which is now, firstly, in terms of its performance on the stock market, I think its share price has doubled, how it's seen around the world, everything. And in the space of, I think he's only been there 18 months, he has transformed this massive corporation. And if people ever say to you, one person can't make a difference, nonsense. Have a look at Rolls-Royce, because you know what? My experience is any business of any size, their culture eventually reflects the leader. And therefore, that leader has got to be someone who is in the business of growing and developing that business with a very clear vision and purpose.
Now, you did mention this CEO has to get into the chopper, and, in this chopper, who's in the chopper with them? And can they just land anywhere? Or if they can't land, then that's it?
Obviously, it depends on the size of the business. If you're talking about a small or medium business, a family type business, it's principally the business, whoever the leader is, CEO, managing director, president, whatever they call themselves, is principally that person, because there may be family people involved, there may be family shareholders, but they may not necessarily be the right people to be getting up in a helicopter and indeed looking over the horizon and being prepared to take risks. So it's got to be the person in charge. In a larger corporation, it's the C-suite, it's the top team. It should be the whole of that top team that spends time getting up in the helicopter. If you're talking about a multinational corporation, maybe that top team is split by discipline. You've got typically sales and marketing, manufacturing, whatever. They need to be getting in their helicopter, just looking at the area they are responsible for. I mean, particularly the whole area, commercial side of sales and marketing and all the rest. If COVID and the lockdown taught us something, it's you've got to very regularly tear up the piece of paper and start again, because customers come and go, customers disappear, new customers appear. And I couldn't tell you how many times, Prosper, I have had sales managers say to me, I know every prospect there is. It's nonsense. You have got to continually prospect for business, no matter what size business you are, no matter how successful you are. And one of the dangers is being too successful, because you start getting complacent. the sort of rule of thumb in a traditional sales force is that they should be spending, on average, 20% of their time prospecting just to stand still. Well, that's a day a week. That's a day a week looking for new customers or talking to new customers, prospective new customers. If you're wanting to grow your business, it's probably double that amount. But that should carry on no matter what, no matter how big you are, no matter what. That prospecting, of course, these days is in all kinds of ways. An awful lot of it's online, but it is something you've got to keep going, because customers come and go, and they come and go more quickly than they ever used to. Let's be honest, there's not really any customer loyalty anymore. Forget it.
If anyone can offer them 3 easy payments, then they're out of the door.
Yep.
Absolutely. Now, we keep talking about the helicopter, and obviously we've got new technology now. You could just fly a drone around here. How can somebody win in this new game of business?
Okay. I mean, you mentioned earlier that one of my tenets is keeping things simple, because I just believe business is simple. At the end of the day, someone's got something to sell, somebody wants to buy, and maybe someone has to make something. That's sort of all it is, really. And what I would say to people is, I think there's 4 things that you've got to focus on if you really want to be successful in this world we're in now. And the first one is, you've got to be exceptional. It's not good enough being outstanding. It's not good enough being very good at what you do. You have got to be exceptional at what you do, and absolutely everywhere you do it. And those are the companies that are winning these days, that are really motoring. They are exceptional. Do not accept second best. Now, there's a whole load of consequences from that. And it includes the people who work for you, to be honest. And I'm very blunt about this. You need, throughout your businesses, 8, 9s and 10s. If anyone below that level, judged by what you want them to do, and that is different from business to business, shouldn't be there. Because the other thing that's relevant these days is, firstly, all the research shows there's going to be a shortage of talent around the world by 2030. And secondly, talent is much more mobile than it used to be. And if you've got 8, 9s and 10s surrounded by 4, 5s and 6s, they're going to walk. They will not stay with you. They will walk. And then you're really in trouble. So in terms of being exceptional, you've got to have people who are exceptional as well, by whatever means you want to judge them for your particular business. But it's all the other things that you do. New technology, digital tech is arriving like at eye-watering speeds these days. And I'm still coming across business leaders who go, "Oh, I don't understand AI. I don't want anything to do with it." Just the same as they said, "I don't understand the internet. I don't want anything to do with it." And I guess back in the 19 whatevers, they said, "I don't understand steamed chips. I'm going to stay with shaving chips." You can't do that anymore. It's all the time. All this stuff is arriving. And I think it's fantastic, because it actually means that small businesses are, some small businesses are running rings around large corporations, because small businesses generally are much more agile, and they're able to adopt all this new stuff quickly. And the other thing is, you need young people, because somehow young people get this stuff. It's sort of beamed straight into their heads, I think. And I say to people, you need young people on the board of your company. You need people below the age of 30 on the board of your company. And of course, a small business, there isn't a board. There's one table, and everyone's sitting at the table anyway. And that's how they're able to move so quickly. So being agile is important. So that's all about being exceptional. Second one is, it's got to be a great place to work. And that follows on what I was just saying about it. It really does have to be a great place to work, because people are so much more mobile than they used to be. And I and my business partner have done a lot of research on this, and that's all in one of my books. The third one is, we've also talked about, you've got to constantly, mercilessly prospect for business. Never, ever stop doing it. And I've got 1 or 2 stories in my book of of things that I just wouldn't believe, where companies, one was an Australia one, incidentally, that was being incredibly successful and forgot to prospect for new business, and ended up being sold for next to nothing to their biggest American competitor, just because they had stopped prospecting and they'd allowed themselves to get complacent. And then the fourth one is, you've got to focus on the bottom line. Now, when I work in the developing world, when I work in Hong Kong or in Africa or India, I don't need to mention this one, because they say, well, yeah, of course, that's why I've got a business. But in the West, in the developing world, we love to say, oh, no, profit is a dirty word. We're here for other reasons. We're here to save the planet and all kinds of stuff. And indeed, the same with charities. Charities, you're absolutely clear about their purpose, who their beneficiaries are, but often they forget about the financial bit. They think the financial bit, oh, well, no, we mustn't spend money. We mustn't have good people because they cost too much. But the reverse is true, of course. If a charity is run financially like the very best world-class business, that's the very best thing for their beneficiaries when you think about it. So you've got to focus on that bottom line. The only difference between a charity or a not-for-profit and the rest is that all those profits go straight back into the business instead of a percentage. That's the only difference, and that should be the only difference in terms of the way you think, in my view.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for taking us through all of that. And you are absolutely right. Being exceptional in business, especially these days in the age of AI, where whatever we thought was the obviously moat around our businesses, which is maybe content or showing up online, that has actually been obliterated by the coming of technology. And also, I like what you say that you should just surround yourself with A players within the business, because at the end of the day, even if you don't want those A players, if you happen to have them, they won't stick around because they're not being supported by every other person that has just been, crammed into the chopper, like you said. And obviously, it just all sounds like common sense, though. And where do we get it?
You know what, Prosper, you've got there. It is common sense. 90% of what I talk about is common sense. But you know what? There's not a lot around. Let me just tell you another little story. Every single master class I run in the world, at some point I ask the question. I say, tell me, put your hand up. Does every one of your customers know about everything you do? And worldwide, 80% of the room put their hand up and say, no, they don't. And I say to them, let's just analyze that for a minute. Are you telling me you've got customers who love you, who are buying something you could provide for them from the competition just because you haven't told them? And they sort of go, yeah. And I say, do you know what? That's stupid. That's stupid. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, go out and contact every single one of your customers and tell them about everything you do. That could be there could be no more common sense than that, Prosper. But that's where we are. That we're human beings, we get into all the big stuff. I have to be honest with you. Business schools and I don't always get on, because so many business schools are in the business of making business complex, and I just don't accept it. Business is simple, and if you can get in that helicopter and keep it simple, you're going to absolutely thrive.
Absolutely. I like that. And I also like the other thing about obviously maintaining the bottom line. I don't know if you can speak to this, but when I arrived here in Australia, they have this statement that, or a way of life that they call the tall poppy syndrome. So it basically means you can't really talk about, what you're making in your business. You can't really flaunt that success, which has really made it difficult for people to actually succeed, because they are only now focusing on things that are celebrated, and nobody's celebrating the actual revenues and the actual staying in business. I don't know. It's something
I recognize it. We've had it here at various points. I've seen it in America, and it's very sad, and the other thing that, you mentioned earlier about me spending time around the world. And it isn't always from, as it were, the developed to the developing world that it goes in the other direction. You know, I work in Africa, particularly Africa, Far East and India. And I love working with those business leaders because they get it. You know, they listen to what I've got to say. They don't just take it, they think about it, but they think about it for a few minutes and then they go for it. And they say, okay, we'll do it. And if there's one thing I'm always doing when I'm speaking in Europe or America or Australia, is to say, stop pontificating. You know, stop thinking about it, for God's sake. You know, you're much better taking a wrong decision than no decision. And I tell you what, all those other people in the world, they are moving much more quickly than you are, and they're adopting these things and flying forward. And that is genuinely what I'm seeing. And I think, you know, if we have to call it the developing world, I don't like it, but if we have to call it the developing world, you know, it is moving incredibly quickly. And there are some phenomenal people out there and some phenomenal businesses.
Oh, absolutely. But you see, there's an oxymoron in all of that. I mean, you've lived in Kenya, and they have this attitude of Hakuna Matata, pole pole, you know, everything just happens in its own time and things of that nature. But the agility that they take on certain things is also something to be marveled at, like you're saying, because it's, you know, that whole thing, it takes a redemptive amount of perspective to actually notice that. So that really puts you in a really good position there. Now, the other thing that helps people become exceptional these days is being able to speak. And this sounds like something that you have taken on in stride. I mean, a lot of people, I think it was Seinfeld, not David, Seinfeld. What's his name? Seinfeld. He mentioned some people would rather be the person in the coffin than the person, you know, saying the eulogy. You know? Every
time they do research on what people are most frightened of, public speaking is always one above death, which is great for us. but yeah, generally people, you know, aren't very keen about standing up in front of people, and they need to be. And if we can help people, excuse me, get better at standing up and speaking and expressing themselves succinctly, because that's the other thing, you know, we're all so used to online where everything is sound bites, everything is short. You know, the Sun newspaper here in the UK, which is the sort of biggest selling tabloid newspaper, the guys who write the headlines, I understand, are the highest paid journalists in the whole of the UK. And the reason is they're able to come up with a 4-word headline that absolutely nails it, you know? It's a very clever skill. But in a way, we've got to be able to do the same. When we're standing up to speak, to get a message across, we've got to make it succinct and meaningful. And that is something that we need to work on. You know, it's a skill that we need to develop. And there's people out there who can help you do that. And who, again, may I tell you just a little story? A guy I've worked with, an upcoming speaker. This guy, his parents, he was born in Ghana. When he was 5 years old, his parents decided that they would move to Italy on a whim. They moved to Italy when he was 4. He therefore went to school in Italy, had to learn Italian. At the age of 14, they moved to London, to the east side of London, where he was beaten up every week, couldn't speak a word of English. He had to either join a gang or get good at sport, so he got good at sport, and he was hoping to get to the Olympics with the Italian team, but didn't quite make it. He then got into speaking, really going into schools, just saying, look, if I can succeed, so can you. And so he was going into deprived schools. And I started working with him about 3 years ago. Last week, 2 weeks ago, we were at his wedding, him and his lovely wife, Lara, in Sorrento in Italy. He has done 400 speaking gigs in the last 18 months.
Wow.
He was on The Apprentice on TV here. He is now working all over the world, and it is absolutely phenomenal. You know, it just shows what can happen. His byline is "Believe in greatness," and it's absolutely right. You know, everything is possible in this world we're in now, no matter where you start, no matter who you are and what your background is. And I think that's something else that we've all got to remember here and try and support if we can.
And obviously, speaking doesn't come naturally to a lot of people, and you seem to have grasped that. I mean, obviously, because English is your native language, but you also did, sort of undergo some sort of professional training. Now, tell us, yeah.
Okay, and yeah, I mean, speaking is like any other profession. You've got to learn the tools of the trade, you know, and there's a whole load of stuff. I mean, I would certainly say to anybody, join your local speaking association. You know, I'm in the PSA in the UK, but we're affiliated. I think there's 16 around the world. And, you know, that's where I learned the tools of my trade as a speaker. I mean, all kinds of stuff that you maybe don't necessarily think about. You know, if you're giving a keynote speech, for example, let's say it's just 20 minutes. Again, very obvious stuff, I suppose, but it's got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And no matter what you're talking about, even if it's something really boring like business is to most people, you've got to take people through an emotional journey. That's what makes people remember it. You know, people ask, what's the difference between a trainer, a lecturer, and a speaker? And it's the 3 E's. All three of us educate, but speakers also entertain and they enthuse. I would argue that the other two ought to as well, but nevertheless, typically that's the case. And if you can do that, if you can be passionate about what you're talking about, and I say this to CEOs, I say, look, if you're not passionate, if you do not believe in what you're doing as a CEO, you're going to get sussed. You're going to get sussed by your employees and your customers and everybody. You've got to be passionate about it. It should be oozing through the pores of your skin because, you know, passion is infectious. People follow people with passion. And that's what you've got to be if you're running a business as well. And if you can stand up and say those things, whether it's to your employees or whether it's to the bank that you're trying to borrow money from, any of those things, if you're able to speak to them succinctly and with passion, you're going to be much more successful.
Absolutely. Now that takes... that actually covers the exceptional side of things, because if you can communicate a message, you really become exceptional and everything else just, falls from there. Now, speaking of a great place to work, we're now in a space and an era where technology is sort of really taking over, and there's now a mix of 3 or 4 different generations all in the same break room. Now, how do you maybe work with leaders to maybe rewire their approach so they can maybe inspire the people that they want to be working with?
That's a very perceptive question, Prosper, because, those generations, as you say, 3 generations in the same room, are actually switched on by different things in terms of their job, These days, the newest generation, the number one priority is always, I want to know what my job means. I want to be doing something meaningful. I want to know where I fit in and how I can make a difference. Different generations, it's actually, I'm doing it so I can pay my mortgage. That's what it's about, not a lot else. And there's others in between. So I would always say to leaders, you've got to spend a bit of time recognizing this, that in the room, there's different buttons you need to press for different people based upon their ages, based upon their backgrounds, based upon all kinds of things, to be honest. And that, I guess, one of the attributes of good leaders is perception. And that's perception of people. You know, when you're sitting in a room of people, you should be able to tell how they're feeling about what it is you're saying. And you need to be making sure you can pull it. This is all about the skills of chairing a meeting, if you like, but it's the same thing. It goes all the way through. Perceptive of people and how they're feeling and what buttons they need pressing, I think is very important. And you can do lots of research on this stuff. It's so easy to do these days. You know, you don't have to invent it for yourself. But that first priority of why am I, what switches me on to work for you, you need to be quite clear amongst your people what that is for the different people.
Clarity is so important. I mean, that's the reason why the windshield is much bigger than the rearview mirror. You know, just
yes, very good. Yes, indeed.
So now, Roger, you now at this giving back stage of your career, even though we still want a whole lot more from you. I mean, I feel like you're only just getting started. But if you look back to everything you've done, the 30,000 people you've spoken to, the helicopters you've been in, what's something that, you know, you didn't understand on your way up that you now understand because you've lived it?
Oh, I guess it probably is the one we've spent most time talking about, which is how important it is to get in that helicopter regularly, no matter what's going on out there. And let's be honest, you know, when you're really in severe difficulty in your business, you're going to be down in the mud and the bullets. And that's where you're really going to be. That's going to be keeping you awake at night. But even then, you've got to find a way by which you can get in the helicopter and look at that big picture. You know, and people do it different ways. I mean, I know some where, you know, they go to the gym once a week, and when they're in the gym, you know, their brain is working on looking at their business. In my case, it was always when I was traveling. For some reason, for me, if I had physical distance between me and my business, you know, it made it easier for me to look at the big picture. But I would say you've just got to find a way to do that. And when I look back, you know, I didn't when I was younger. You know, I was straight in there. No one could do the job better. You know, we all say this, don't we? Nobody can do the job better than me, so I better do it, you know, and all that nonsense. It's total garbage. And I guess the other big one to say, if I'm really honest with you, I didn't listen as I should have listened, particularly to people. I had a bit of a reputation of interrupting people because I was always wanting to move forward. But I think it is very, very important that you give each and every person who works for you the time and the space for you to listen to them, and a level of listening which isn't this one. What do they call it? There's a word for it, I can't remember, but you're sitting on the edge of your seat waiting to speak, you know, not that one. The one where you are genuinely listening to what they're saying, letting it go and respond. And that means it's taking time when there's other things that you could be doing. But I think that's probably a big lesson that I had to learn.
Yeah, because these are the people that are on the ground. They're the people that are speaking to the customers. They're getting the actual feedback. And if you would actually just stop and listen, maybe people haven't been buying a product line for a while.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right. Now, I mean, there's a lot that we could extrapolate, and obviously you need to whisk yourself out with this chopper so you can go on and look at whatever you're looking at. But if somebody's just listening to this and they're like, okay, I get it. You know, there's a lot going on here. What's the one thing that they could just start doing today and start really taking back control of their business and hopefully their happiness?
Okay. Again, a little story. I have to tell you a story. I was speaking to... I ran a masterclass for a group of small business leaders, really, and it was Vistage. You may have heard of Vistage, and there's a chair in charge. And I did a half-day workshop, and there was one guy in the room who, sort of after an hour or two of he wasn't, if you know what I mean, Prosper, he wasn't in the room anymore. And it sort of got to lunchtime, and the chair said to me, he said, Norman, look, he said, Norman, we lost you earlier. You weren't in the room, and you were a bit late back after the coffee break. What's going on? And he said, yeah, he said, as you know, he said, I'm running a third generation toy business. He said, I've been running it now for 3 years and we're getting absolutely nowhere. And he said, and I'm sick of it. And that Roger was talking about in terms of purpose, rang a chord with me, he said. So we've got a board meeting tomorrow, and that's the whole family who are the shareholders of the business. And I've got my PA to tear up the agenda. You know what? We're going to have one item on the agenda, and it's purpose. And he said, you know what? It's going to be like electing the Pope. We're going to sit there until the smoke comes out of the chimney. And I said to him, Norman, that's absolutely amazing. Tell me how it went. And he rang me back 3 days later, and he said, Roger, it was incredible. It was so stressful. He said, it took us all day. He said, but we got there. We nailed what the business is about. That, you know, my father was not going to interfere anymore, and other members of the family are not going to interfere in the anymore. And he said, I'm now crystal clear about where we're going. And you know what? He said, there was one result of this that I wasn't expecting. I said, what was that? He said, I have felt the stress drop off my shoulders. He said, I feel 10 years younger than I did, 3 days ago. He said, it's phenomenal. The mere fact now that I have got everyone pulling in the same direction when I didn't really realize totally that they weren't before, as I already know is going to make a massive difference to this business. And I think that's what I'd just say to everyone. I know that's where we started today, but it's so important. Everyone needs to be pulling in the same direction. And you may not even realize they're not until you start talking about it.
Absolutely. Now, Roger, I always regret it when I bring in people like yourself onto the show, because there just seems to be so much that we can get into and so little time for us to cover everything else. But now that you've brought us into your world, what's next? What are you working on? Or have you got your pilot's license yet, so you can start buying?
Well, I've got a classic car. I've got a 1962 V8, which I've restored. So I've spent the last 5 years restoring it. It's just about done now. And I'm in this motor club here where we give rides for charity. So it's a win-win. So I go all over the country. We take people out for rides in our old cars, and all the money goes to children's charities. So that's great. But I finished restoring the car last year. So my wife said to me, oh, God, what are we going to do with you now? And she's managed to get me into woodworking. So I'm now doing some woodworking, and I'm making a bit of stuff. Not very well, but yeah. But also on top of that, last year I went to Antarctica. And if you've never been, you have got to go. It is the most phenomenal place in the world. And this year, we've just got back from going to Galapagos. So that's pretty good too. What a life.
Absolutely.
What a life.
And what a journey. I mean, from power stations in Kenya to governments in the boardroom, I think you just really remind us that real leadership it actually begins the moment you stop following the rules that everybody else is putting out there.
Yep.
But thank you so much for leading the way and staying in the chopper,
absolutely no problem, Prosper. And can I just say, if anyone wants, to hear a bit more or would like to ask me a question or two, just drop me an email. I'm sure you'll let them know my email address. I will always answer, but I just want everyone to be more successful than they were before.
Well, absolutely. And thank you so much, Roger, for allowing people that, because half of the time we just need that confirmation and belief, that it can be done and somebody else has done it before, you know what I mean? And that proverbial tap on the shoulder that it's your turn to lead now. And I think that's what you're doing and giving people in your own little way. So thank you so much for everything.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Prosper.
Yeah.
And please, you carry on what you're doing, because you're also doing an amazing job. Thank you very much indeed.
I appreciate that part very much. Now, for those that are watching right now, if this episode sparked something in you, I encourage you to share it with somebody who just needs that reminder that it's never too late to rewrite your leadership story. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to the Online Prosperity Show, because in the next episode, we're going to be diving into ideas that will help you create a happier and more prosperous existence. Now, I'll be putting all those links to Roger's books and how you can get a hold of him and maybe see what else he's doing or where in the world he could be, because as he's mentioned, Antarctica and all the other places that he's going into, you never know. He might be in a city next to you and you wouldn't even realize. So if you're ready to stop running your business on autopilot and start leading with a purpose, I really encourage you to visit the CEOexperts.com and follow Roger on LinkedIn for more powerful insights that will actually help you lead with clarity, courage, and common sense. I don't know what you're going to do with this information today, but I hope it's going to help you be that leader that leads with common sense. Bye for now.